Good morning and welcome to the Eastman Financial Report. I'm Dan Eastman, your host, and today is February 26th, 2026. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we appreciate your viewership here at the Eastman Financial Report, as well as throughout the day on all of the amazing programming you see at Worldview Tube and, of course, here at Worldview Radio. As you know, we are a Christian broadcasting network, and it's our ministry, our mission, our passion, and our goal to bring to that great marketplace of ideas, the global marketplace of ideas, the news and information of the day from a Christian perspective. And that's what we do, and that's what we've been doing since 2006, and that's what we will continue to do until the second coming. So it's important that we continue to bring our voice and our viewpoint into that ever increasing, ever expanding marketplace of ideas and thoughts. And we do that with our passion. That's our ministry. If you'd like to help us in our efforts, you can do that by going to worldviewfoundation.com and making a donation. You can sign up for a one-time donation, which is always appreciated, or you can sign up to make monthly donations, and that has the added economic benefit of flattening our revenue curve a bit so we can better match costs to revenues and keep our content broadcasting free of charge. As you know, we don't charge a subscription or a paywall. This information is freely given, just as the gospel was spread 2,000 years ago by the apostles throughout the Middle East. They didn't charge admission. That wasn't a subscription service. It was basically a gift freely given, and that's what we do in our ministry today. And of course, you can help us in that effort. Website is on the bottom of the screen. You can either go to wvwfoundation.com or worldviewfoundation.com, or you can use the QR code, and it'll take you right to the website, and you can make a donation. And we do appreciate all the donations we receive from our viewers, our supporters, our friends, because this is a Christian ministry and we are determined to keep our message free and free of charge and freely distributed globally. And you're a big part of that when you help out. You can also help us by doing business with the vendors you see advertising throughout the day on our network. As you know, we don't sell blocks of advertising time. Rather, we find companies that we know and trust, and then we partner with them so that when you buy goods and services from them, a small portion of the proceeds comes back to us in the form of a commission, and that also helps us continue our ministry. So we appreciate you doing business with those fine companies as well. There's a third way that you can help us out, and you can also help yourself in the process. You can subscribe to our product called worldviewtube.com/vault. It's a new product we've come out with. And as you know, Brandon House has been in this ministry since I think 2006. He's written 15 books, and most of those are now in digital form. He has had conferences and seminars and events around the country. All of that information is now digitally captured and it lives in the vault. And you can subscribe to that vault. It's at the bottom of the screen. If you go to worldviewtube.com/vault, you can subscribe. Now, there is a little bit of a paywall, and that's the idea. You subscribe to the vault, and that helps us in our ministry. It helps us keep this content free of charge. But the beautiful thing about the vault is it is an amazing collection of Brandon House ministry. And when you are when we all go through moods in life where we need some spiritual enhancement or things are starting going right, and of course we first and foremost turn to Scripture because God speaks to us through His Word and Sacrament. But in addition to Word and Sacrament, it's good to be part of a Christian belief community, the church, and that's what the vault is. It's a collection of material which is representative of the church. So when you subscribe to the vault and you log in, and this content is on demand, available on demand 24/7, by the way. So if you're having a rough night, middle of the night, 3 o'clock, you can't sleep, log into the vault, and what you'll find is a community of believers who are consistent, and it is very spiritually uplifting. It's a wonderful tool for you and I, everyone, to have in our toolbox, because there are times when you just feel like you need to have the support of a larger church, and that's what the vault is. It's wonderful content. It's Christian based. It's all of Brandon House Ministries, wonderful books, events. It's very uplifting, and it can be a great resource to you if you're struggling in life with whatever comes your way. It's also a wonderful gift to give somebody who is struggling that you know, some friend or relative, family member going through a rough spot, or maybe financial troubles, personal troubles, family troubles, whatever. what a wonderful gift to give to somebody that they can enter into the vault and see a believing community that is spiritually uplifting. So it's a great thing to do. So buy one for yourself and buy one for that friend of yours who's in need. It's a 1 year subscription. It's very reasonably priced, and it will be a useful tool for yourself and your friends, and it will also support our ministry. So that's how you can support the ministry. You make a donation, or you can do business with the companies you see advertising, or you subscribe to the vault, or you do all three. But in any event, we appreciate your support, and please take a good look at the vault. That's a wonderful product. And of course, the Eastman Financial Report reruns are buried in the vault there as well. So if you'd like to review what I've said over the past 3 years and perhaps come on my program and challenge me, this is the dismal science, you can do that. And it's a wonderful collection of all sorts of material. Okay, let's jump into the news. And of course, today is Thursday, and traditionally in Professor Eastman's class, we would have Unemployment Thursday, where we would review the unemployment claims made last week, the prior week. And this is an important metric that economists will use, because what we're trying to do is get a sense of where the American labor market is. And there is a market for labor. If you have a job and you participate in the economy and you're not in business, you don't own a small business, but you work for a W-2 for somebody else, that is the market for labor. And of course, it's a supply of labor and a demand for labor. And there finds an economic inflection point, an Adam Smith supply and demand curve. And at some point, there's a quantity of labor at a certain price. And the quantity of labor is the public policy number that we worry about, because the quantity of labor demanded by the economy is effectively translating into the employment rate and the derivative, the unemployment rate. And that's why, from a policy perspective, we watch the unemployment rate. If that starts to creep up, that's not a good thing for public policy. And of course, in theory, the federal government, which should not even be anywhere near the economy, but the point is, in theory, those in policy decisions will want to do things in the public good to create jobs so that all of the citizens who want a job can find a job. That would be considered full employment. And statistically, we look at that as being 5% of the workforce or fewer are unemployed, involuntarily unemployed. They're laid off or factory closed or whatever. So you want 5% unemployment or less. And we're cruising at about 4.2% right now, which is above 3%, and it's above the median, but it is below 5%. So from an economics professor's perspective, or a financial analyst's perspective, we would say that we're in full employment in the American economy. And that's what we want, because we don't want a lot of unemployed people, because it's not good for the economy. It makes the economy shrink. Unemployed people don't earn paychecks and spend money, and it's a cycling downward. You want to have full employment within the economy, and we do. Now, the number that came out today was surprisingly low, at least from my perspective. It was 212,000 people last week filed for unemployment at their various state unemployment offices. Now, first and foremost, as a Christian broadcasting network, we keep these 212,000 people in our prayers, because obviously they've lost their job and they are reaching out to the social safety net provided by the states for an unemployment check so that they can pay the rent or buy groceries until such time as they can find a new job and get on with the rest of their lives. So it's not a good place to be. It's a social safety net program, a social program that was designed to assist people who lose their job, not because they quit or got fired, but because they, for no fault of their own, their employer is laying people off. It's an economic decision. They're the victims of a larger economic decision, not a personal decision, and therefore the state should step in and help these people along. Now, unemployment benefits are not a substitute for earning a wage. They're low, and they are temporary. They're finite. In Wisconsin, we have a 2-year window. If you decide to sign up for the unemployment program, you have duties and obligations. Number one, you have to be able to demonstrate to the unemployment office that you've submitted 2 resumes or filled out 2 job applications every week. And when you certify that, then they send you a very small check. And it's never enough to live on because we don't want to put people on a permanent living program. And then if you continue your job search, you have 2 years to find a job, which is a generous amount of time. If you're still struggling in trying to find a replacement job 2 years later, that probably suggests that maybe retraining or rethinking the job you're looking for. And a point is, it pushes people into making decisions to either go back to school, get better training, different training, search for jobs in different sectors. It's a finite program. And it's done that way because it's an interesting thing, because those programs are approved and created by the states, not the federal government. And of course, the people of Wisconsin, Illinois, wherever the programs are, will tend to look a bit suspicious when their fellow neighbors, friends and neighbors are on unemployment. They are thinking perhaps instead of us subsidizing your life, maybe you should go find a job and pay taxes in and help subsidize others. That's the mechanism that keeps these programs thin, and that's why there are not great benefits involved. So it raises the bigger issue. If these programs exist, and there's 212,000 people across the country who applied for unemployment last week, by what incentive or motivation, and what about all the people who are unemployed that don't bother signing up for the program? Because it's a hassle. You have to do stuff. You have to apply. You have to fill out reports. And it's not a path to easy money, and it's designed to not be a path to easy money, to keep everybody from stampeding to the program. But the question becomes, why doesn't everyone do that? Well, because unless you have to apply for an unemployment program, perhaps you can live on credit card capacity. Not a great idea, but it certainly bridges you until you can find the next job. You perhaps are living in a dual income household or triple or quadruple income household, and losing one path doesn't necessarily put you over the edge, so you don't have to apply for unemployment. You trim your sails and you start looking for a new job. Or perhaps you've got some savings, which is rarer and rarer in the American economy, but you perhaps have some money saved up, and it'll bridge you until you find the next job. There are always reasons why people don't apply for the unemployment programs. And that's why it's important. The reason I'm telling you this is that's why it's important that when you see the unemployment number headline, don't be thinking of this as an all or nothing number. It's not. It's a subset of the people who are unemployed, because many people who are unemployed can take care of themselves through a different means. You don't have to go on the government program. So when we see 212,000 new unemployment claims last week, that's not the total number. There could be many more people unemployed, but have the wherewithal to continue the job search without having to apply for the government program. Another thing we do is we watch not only last week's claims, but we look at continuing claims. These are people who, at 1 week or another, they got on the program and they're still on. It's a continuing claim. And that number is reported at 1.83 million people, which is a lot of people. There are a lot of 1.83 million people across the country are on unemployment. Not earth-shattering, but it's because we have 330 million Americans and we have a job force of about 165 million Americans. So there's about 1.8 million people that are on this unemployment program as a continuing number. Now, the thing to understand from an economic perspective, and I talk about this a lot, is what economists do and certain financial analysts. We plot numbers over a series of time, a period of time. And if you're plotting this week by week by week, what you'd want to look for is the slope of the curve. There's a data point, and then there's a time lapse, and then there's a data point and a time lapse and a data point. And you want to see, is that going up? Are there more and more claims over time? Does this suggest that there's more unemployment? Or is it going down and there are fewer and fewer claims over time? It suggests that we are approaching full employment. And what we're seeing, and if you go back to the you subscribe to the Vault and then you go to the Eastman Financial Reports from 3 years ago, what you'll find is we've been talking about an unemployment claims number on a weekly basis of somewhere between 200,000 and 250,000. So that curve over a 3-year period is just not exciting. It's boring. It's just a flat curve, it kind of wiggles up and down a little bit. But if you take the slope over that period of time, which is a little bit of a mathematical dance, you will realize that we're not seeing in these numbers, the unemployment claims numbers, an increase in unemployment, that the American economy is absorbing the workforce and we're not seeing unemployment above 5%. And that's what President Trump was talking about in the State of the Union. So, the economy's really going, And when you look at the labor numbers, you realize that we're just not looking in an unemployment situation that is scary at all right now over a period of 3 years. Now, of course, if you're reading the media like we all do, you realize one of the really big hot stories of the day is AI is going to come along and wipe out everybody's job, and it's going to happen by next Thursday or something, some short deadline. The reality is we're not seeing that in the economics numbers. We're just not. Now, maybe AI people people who get laid off because AI came to town don't apply for unemployment benefits. But if you think about it, if you can have this mass wipeout of 90% of the jobs in America, we will see that in this trend. So that's why when you read these stories about AI wiping out the universe, look to the data. You want to look at the unemployment number, which is Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it's a number. It used to be a better number. It did, but then after the Biden year, I know it's hard. Recovery is hard. But the point is you've got the unemployment number, and we've got the unemployment claims number and the continuing claims number. And none of these numbers are suggesting that we're seeing massive unemployment because AI came in and wiped out all the mid-level jobs. We're not seeing it. But we'll watch that, and it could happen. I mean, these things always happen with a lag. That's why we plot data over time, intervals of time. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll watch that number and we will see. But for purposes of today, we're not seeing it. We're not seeing that being wiped out. Now, all right, so that's the labor market. And of course, the Federal Reserve, which goes back into its conclave on March 17th and 18th, the St. Patrick's Day meeting, when they will decide whether to once again leave the interest rates flat, or maybe they're going to lower them again, as President Trump really would like to see lower interest rates, stimulate the economy, grow the economy, or whether they'll be looking at other numbers to suggest maybe slow the economy down and raise interest rates. Well, if you look at the consumer price index, and I touched on this yesterday, the consumer price index is another government generated number. And if you look at the January number, which is reported in February, the headline consumer price index increase was 2.4%. What that means is the prices are 2.4% higher than they were last year in January. And in December, the prices were 2.7% higher than they were last December, or a year ago, December. So what we're seeing is a softening in inflation at the headline level. Now, headlines is a market basket full of goods that the government figures out as sort of a representative of what people buy, and they calculate the prices accordingly. I suppose they go, shopping and write down all the prices and do some math. But the point is, it's this market basket of goods and services that people would consume. And then there's a core number where they take out food and energy, because food prices and energy prices are very volatile. They kind of go up and down with the weather, or energy prices, oil prices are very political. But the point is, core is 2.5 in January, and headline is 2.4, which means there's a convergence of the two, where core is starting to agree with headline. And once again, that suggests that there's very modest inflation in the economy. I did notice that food inflation came in at 2.9%, and I think all of us who do grocery shopping from time to time will see that. But the point is, you're not seeing an explosion in inflation. As a matter of fact, you're seeing inflation coming down right now. So if inflation is coming down and labor is sort of at 4.2%, if you cut interest rates, you're not going to worry about fueling the economy, because there's always a lag. When you cut interest rates, it takes a while to build up steam in the inflation numbers. But what you will do is incentivize people to go to work or hire people, and then maybe you can bring the unemployment number down into the 3% range rather than the 4% range. So you can do good by cutting the interest rate. So we'll see what the Federal Reserve does. Okay, I have to take a break here, and then I want to talk about money. So when you come back, it'll be interesting. Be right back. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Would you like to gain access to over 20 years of my radio shows, TV shows, my books? I've written 15 books, and most of those books are ebooks now. And we have conference DVDs, conferences where we filmed our conferences at the Ozarks, literally starting 20 years ago. It's all available in our archived vault. All you have to do is go to worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and for a reasonable monthly fee, you gain access to over 20 years of Christian worldview programming, news, information, books, documentaries, and a powerful search engine. And folks, it's a great way not only to educate yourself, equip yourself, but it's a big way that you can help fund our continuation as a broadcast network. Please check it out. worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault, and help us continue pushing out a Christian worldview.
Okay, I'm back. So let's talk about money again. There's an interesting ripple in the news today. And again, the Eastman Financial Report was designed to be training in reading headlines and looking beyond or deeper than the headlines. The whole critical thinking skill that we develop, we train young students in college to think about critical thinking rather than being influenced by propaganda and influenced by agenda. When you see a headline, you want to think about it and you want to dig deeper and you have a better understanding, and that's a sign of an educated person. If you can do that for 4 years and 120 credits, they'll hand you a piece of paper and you owe 100,000 in student loans and you're out the door as a critical thinking college graduate. So let's think about this. The story that I'm seeing, and there's a lot of pressure, and of course we've watched President Trump dealing with our current chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, and of course Mr. Powell's term is coming up, and President Trump has now nominated a new a new Federal Reserve chair. And they'll go through a confirmation process. And of course, a big part of that is the debate about cutting the interest rates that I was just talking about. If you cut the interest rates, you stimulate the economy and put people back to work. And that's a good thing to do during the midterm elections, is get the voters back to work, because people who are unemployed are probably not going to vote for the incumbent. Okay, they're going to vote for somebody else. They want change. So it's a real incentive to keep the interest rates low and stimulate the economy. And of course, the blowback, and this is the headline, of course, is that you see people saying the Federal Reserve's independence is threatened. The Federal Reserve's independence, it's very important that the Federal Reserve stay independent of the federal government. Well, I want to dissect that. That's the headline I want to dissect today, and bring our critical thinking and analytic skills and start thinking about, what does that mean? Why do people keep saying that? And what is the agenda? Well, here's the thing. And if you subscribe to the Vault and you go to the Eastman Financial Report reruns, pick a week, any year, I always talk about the Federal Reserve, and many times I talk about how it was created. And I can't, and there isn't enough time today to repeat that, except to say that the Federal Reserve System was created reluctantly, because in the United States, the people of the United States did not want a central bank that modeled the Bank of England. They didn't want that. They didn't want the central bank in Paris. They did not want this monstrous ability to control the banks and the money supply and the people's lives. They wanted small and local, and that's why we had state banks, and from the beginning of the country all the way up until about the Civil War. And it was a real difficult decision for Congress to make, to create a Federal Reserve Bank. A lot of people wanted a one big bank in New York, and the rest of the country was hysterical. You don't want the bankers in New York. Those are the gold guys. We're the silver guys out here. So the compromise, of course, was the Federal Reserve System, where you have 12 regions in the United States. Each region has a Federal Reserve Bank in that region. We have one down in Chicago, Twin Cities, and that Federal Reserve Bank in Chicago, Twin Cities, wherever they are, all 12 of them, are owned by the local banks. The shares of that bank are owned by the banks, the small state chartered banks, the federally chartered banks. The banks own each of the regional Federal Reserve System banks. And so it's owned by the banks. And it's not a federal government operation, even though it's got the word federal in it. People say it's kind of like Federal Express is not the government, and neither is the Federal Reserve, and that's true. It is there are 12 banks owned by local banks, and those local banks are owned by folks in town, merchants, auto dealers, whatever, people who have a couple of shares in the local bank. So it's really owned as a private deal. The local banks are owned by local people, shareholders, and the local banks own the regional Federal Reserve Bank, and it's a private deal. So it's not the federal government. Now, what do you mean? We've got, all right, so the federal government part is you've got 7 governors on a board of governors, and Chairman Powell is the chairman of this board, and there are 7 of them, and those are appointed by the President of the United States to 14-year terms, confirmed by the United States Senate. And that governing board works with the presidents of these Federal Reserve banks, and that's what is that open market committee. When you look at it, it's the 7 governors, and make sure I get the number right here. There's what I think 5 or 6 that are of the bank presidents, and then they rotate. So you serve on the open market committee for a term, and then it kind of rotates around the other 11 banks. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York is a permanent seat on the Federal Open Market Committee. And the other 11, I think it's 5 out of 11, they split. So the point is, this thing's a really diverse system, but there's the 7 governors appointed by the president. Well, the argument and the headline is that this should be independent of the federal government. And it's really an interesting argument that you'd make. If you were a classical economist, a conservative, or a free market or an Adam Smithian type person, you would say that the banking system operates away from the federal government. The economy belongs to the private sector. It is not centrally planned by the government of the United States, the federal government, and the economy should take care of itself. And that's why the banks will create money and contract money to regulate the economy, but that's independent of the federal government, which should be running the post office and protecting the borders. And that's a quaint idea, but that is not the idea that has emerged. When you look at the reality of the Federal Reserve System today, it works, it has no choice but to work with the United States Treasury, because the Treasury is $38.7 trillion in debt floating around out there. And they're running a $2.5 trillion deficit. And the only way to fund the deficit is to sell bonds into the market. And the only way to keep the markets from going nuts is to have the Federal Reserve stepping in, creating new money, buying bonds out of the market, parking it on their balance sheet, quantitative easing, and new money is constantly pumping into the economy, which of course fires the inflation. So the question becomes, is there any historic precedent for independent Federal Reserve? And when you look back into history, this is not a medical show, and I do not give medical advice, but if you can't sleep at night, you can subscribe to The Vault, and then you can have on-demand information. But you could also pick up a History of Economic Thought textbook, and I guarantee you, 2 chapters in, you will be sound asleep because it's the most boring study you can imagine. But it's worth doing, because what you'll realize is that the federal government of the United States used to issue the money. There wasn't the Federal Reserve. So where did the money come from? Well, from the Revolution until the Civil War, local banks would issue banknotes backed by gold and silver in the local bank vault. And these banknotes were the currency. If you didn't use specie, which is gold or silver coins, most people use silver. If you had paper money, it was issued by a local bank. It was basically a receipt that said, if you present this receipt to our teller will give you 1 ounce of silver, or whatever the number was. That was money. Until the Civil War, when the federal government realized that they had to create currency to fund the Civil War, and that's when things got really interesting. Because from the time of independence until 1861, it was local banks. But then in 1861, the Federal Treasury started issuing demand notes, which are the greenbacks. Effectively, that's where we get the term the greenbacks from. And then in 1862, they started issuing United States notes. And then they started issuing national bank notes from banks that were chartered by the federal government in 1863 to 1833. And the Federal Treasury issued U.S. Treasury gold and silver certificates from 1878 to 1970. And then, of course, we had silver and gold certificates that you could take in cash that started in 1879 and ended in 1933. And then from 1933 to 1971, it wasn't backed by gold, but silver certificates were always backed by gold from 1878 to 1964. You could take a silver certificate to the Federal Reserve, hand it to them, or a federal bank, excuse me, federal bank, hand it to them, and they'd give you 10 silver dimes or 4 silver quarters. The point is, and I know I'm just rambling off statistics, but the point is the Federal Treasury of the United States was issuing money up until the time the Federal Reserve was created and beyond, all the way up to 1971 when the Treasury got out of the business of printing money. And that's the point I'm trying to make. There is an independence argument for the Federal Reserve, but the Federal Treasury was issuing money long before and even during the existence of the Federal Reserve. So I want to talk more about this phenomenon because independence is a big issue, but in this fully integrated quantitative easing model that we have to keep the federal debt, $38.7 trillion, from going berserk in the markets, how much independence can you have? And it's really the federal government has captured the Federal Reserve. It's not the other way around. Well, anyway, unfortunately, I'm out of time for today. I do want to talk about powering these data centers tomorrow. And I want to finish the thought on U.S. money because U.S. money, the dollar hasn't been around since 1776. And we've gone through about 8 or 10 iterations of money in the United States. And we're at the threshold of maybe asking that question again. So anyway, I'm out of time. Have a great afternoon. Don't forget to go to Worldview Foundation and make a donation. And I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.